Wake up, rethink the status quo. When you get your money right, then you're the one who runs your life. Come build a wealthy spirit with Sammie and Michelle.
Jordan Grumet, also known as Doc G, is a hospice physician turned author and speaker, as well as the host of the Earn and Invest podcast. Jordan focuses on exploring life's most profound questions, particularly around purpose, happiness, and financial independence. His latest book, The Purpose Code, delves into how we can unlock the meaning and fulfillment in our everyday lives by shifting our focus from big P purpose to little p purpose. Michelle and I really enjoyed reading The Purpose Code and are excited to dive in further today with Doc G. Welcome to Build a Wealthy Spirit. Welcome!
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
So before we dive in deep, we wanted to ask you a question. What is a purpose that you pursue that might surprise people? Like outside of your typical ones that we know you for, like being an author, podcaster, those kind of things.
I have so many versions of purpose that sometimes it's hard to keep track of them. So exercise is a big one. I love walking. So I usually take at least an hour walk every day. I love reading, especially mysteries, cop novels, science fiction, those kind of things. And I usually try to do that a good hour or two a day. I have a secret, though, purpose that I haven't really had time lately to pursue, but it's in the background if I ever find that I'm lacking in things to do. I used to love collecting baseball cards. I used to love collecting things in general, coins, stamps, baseball cards. And so I have a secret passion for collecting. I like memorabilia. And literally, I haven't done anything with that for 20, 30 years. But every time I'm like scrolling on Facebook and I see something about baseball or baseball cards, like my brain lights up. So I know that that's out there waiting for me. And if I ever just feel like I don't have anything to do with my time, I have this version of purpose I could start chasing after, which excites me. And even as we talk about it now, I get animated at the idea of it.
Yeah, I can see you're very excited about it. And it's funny because I didn't know that's what you were going to say. This is somewhat surprising to me, but it actually connects back to your book where you talk about how growing up you went to I don't know if it was still an antique store at that point, but like this antique store where everybody could, the nerds, I think you called them, could come there, trade baseball cards, and kind of just geek out on this sort of thing. So it kind of makes, it's coming full circle. It makes sense now.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great memory of childhood, and that's why I opened the book that way, is I was having purpose modeled for me from being a little kid, and I didn't even know it. I was just watching this person, this guy who owned an antique store, fell in love with the idea of selling baseball cards. He started to do that. He built a community around him of kids like me who didn't have a community, the geeks, the nerds, the kids who were picked and left out. That became my community. And this guy changed my life. And I don't think he even meant to. He was just doing something that was really exciting and purposeful for him. And that's how I kind of connected to this idea that purpose not only fills us up, but probably impacts those around us in ways that we might not even recognize.
Doc G, I want to catch all our listeners up to where you're at. Your journey to this point has been super compelling. I want to start with what inspired you to become a physician?
So I've only wanted to be a physician. I never thought about doing anything else. And I think it mostly stemmed from the fact that my father, who was a doctor, he was very successful and well-loved, died when I was 7 years old. He died suddenly. And being a little kid, I tended to see life through the lens that I was responsible for everything. We're very self-centered at that age. So when he died, I somehow felt that that had something to do with me. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't behaving well enough. And ultimately, I told myself a story, and the story was the way I was going to make up for this was I was going to walk in his footsteps. I was going to fill his shoes. I was going to become a doctor like him, and that would somehow cosmically fix this thing that happened to me. And so that sounds kind of negative, but I wouldn't say that it was a negative journey. In fact, I really loved this idea of becoming a doctor. It filled me up. It became my purpose and identity throughout childhood and young adulthood. And I eventually, lived my dreams, became this doctor, was there helping people, doing lots of good things. But I also realized that it started to burn me out. I wasn't enjoying it as much as I thought I would be. And eventually I was looking for a way out. And that's when I discovered financial independence, realized I had enough money that maybe I could step away from this thing that had been my identity all these years. And that was a moment of both exhilaration and anxiety. In fact, led to what I would call a good 6 to 12 month period of depression in my life where I knew I didn't want to be a doctor anymore, but I had no idea what I wanted to be. I hadn't done any of that deep purpose work. My version of purpose actually was very much based on my father and someone else's version of purpose and not my own. And so I had to do some of the deep work that I now hope to help people with this book.
You know, it's funny because when I'm hearing your story, I relate to it so much. Having pursued being a PA, in my year of sabbatical, I reflect on it and I see how a lot of my motivation to become a physician assistant was rooted in my childhood, like essentially my childhood trauma and trying to resolve that, this idea that I should do something, I should fix it, like I should be the one to take responsibility. And for me, I feel like that was why I entered into medicine, entered into becoming a physician assistant.
I think this has a lot to do with something I talk about in the book. It's the difference between meaning and purpose. Meaning is more about how we cognitively think about the past. It's mostly in our thoughts, and it's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And lots of people like you and I faced trauma in our past, and we were left with this sense of not being enough or needing to prove ourselves. And so instead of maybe even going after things we're passionate about or the things of childhood that really excite us, we take on a societal version of what being important is or a societal version of what enough is, and we pursue that life. But the problem is a lot of times highly successful people like you and I get there, and we actually achieve that goal, but it doesn't solve the issue of the trauma in the past. So it's this trying to purpose your way to enough or trying to purpose your way out of your childhood trauma. It doesn't work. It makes you feel good for a moment, but since it didn't solve the problem of the trauma, you basically double down and then have to do even more, or you just feel lost and burnt out like I did. And the problem is we really need to go back and work through some of that childhood trauma, work on the narratives we tell ourselves about ourselves, realize we already were enough in the first place. Because if you get to that place of feeling like enough, that you always were enough, that you were a good kid who faced some difficult traumas and overcame them, you can then face today and tomorrow and work on not meaning, but purpose. And purpose is more about actions, right? Meaning is about thoughts in the past. Purpose is about the present and future, and it's about actions. It's about doing those things that fill us up. And when we relieve ourselves of using purpose to prove that we're good enough, we can go at it much more joyfully. So we don't have to worry about the goals. We don't have to worry about the achievements. We don't have to worry about using purpose as a definition of why we are a good person or enough, and instead can just focus on what we really enjoy the process of doing.
I really like this idea that you mentioned, purposing your way out of a scenario, a trauma, or whatever thing that we're maybe going through, and sometimes being like, well, it's this big, audacious goal. It has a lot of impact. Maybe that is a thing, this, what you call big P purpose, which we'll dive into. But it's so easy to lean on that sometimes. And like you said, if you're highly ambitious, you put your mind to getting those things done, you actually can. And I think a lot of people can relate to this idea of getting to that end goal and then it doesn't fulfill them the way they thought it would. And I think a lot of times that comes with guilt too, especially if you actually are helping people or making an impact in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, the sad part for me was I had accomplished all this stuff and I had become a doctor, and it didn't relieve me of the feeling that I somehow was responsible for my father's death. I had to do a lot of deep inner work to deal with that. But once I did that, it freed me to then start pursuing in the present and future things that really just did light me up and make me happy, as opposed to this chip on my shoulder that I had to become this doctor and do this thing that was sucking the life away from me at the moment. I could start doing these things that were filling me up and making me feel energized and excited. But I had to deal with that previous trauma. I had to have a better sense of meaning first before I could move on to purpose.
I want to pull on that string too, because part of the reason we wanted to discuss how you got into medicine and your following purpose in that way is to also contrast it with how you describe it seems like the difference between following your passion when it comes to writing and podcasting. Can you tell us a little bit about that, sort of the motivation behind getting into writing and working on those projects?
Well, I've always been a writer, a communicator, a person who loved to have deep conversations and express deep thoughts. But at some point, I told myself that's not really what you do to make a living. That's going to be way too hard. I need to do this kind of bigger, more important thing like becoming a doctor. And so I spent almost all my free time during my, adult years, or at least young adult years, becoming this doctor, but it would seep through. I ended up writing a medical blog. I would do as much public speaking as I could. I never gave myself permission to spend huge amounts of time doing that. I would fit it in during lunch breaks and late at night when everyone was sleeping. I'd write a blog post, or a weekend I could get away to give a talk. I never really gave myself permission to pursue those things because they didn't feel big. They didn't feel audacious. I didn't know if I could be successful at them. One of the biggest things for me was, being a doctor was the thing that I was probably best at. But being a writer and a communicator is the thing that lit me up. And so it was really, really hard to come to terms with the fact that the thing I was best at wasn't the thing that was my joy and passion. And to eventually give myself permission to make that change. So I'd always known these things were deep inside me. And when we talk about how people find purpose, and you'll hear me say this a lot, I don't like the word find. I think we build or create purpose. But we do have to find these anchors or these things to build purpose around. One of the ways is to look at our childhood. What do you do on a weekend when nothing else is scheduled, when no one else is around and you're free on your own? What are those things you do? What did you do when you were a kid? What lit you up? And so for me, writing and communicating and even podcasting, those are all great purpose anchors that I knew were back there. I just had to recognize them and realize how important they were in my life, and then decide that it was okay to pursue them.
I think this relates to a great concept you brought up in your book, big P purpose and little p purpose. I really like this breakdown because it made this concept so much easier to understand. And for me, it really helped me find what my little p purposes are. So can you tell our audience a little bit about what's the difference between a big P purpose and little p purpose?
Certainly. And let me give you some background. When I was going and talking about my book, Taking Stock, my first book, and the idea behind that book, one of the big premises was that we have to put purpose, identity, connections first and then build a financial framework around it. The problem was I would go give talks about that book and people would come up to me after the talk and they'd say, will you stop telling me to find my purpose? I've been trying forever and I can't, and it's frustrating me and I'm getting depressed and anxious. I don't think there is a purpose. So this sent me off on a rabbit hole of research to try to figure out, well, what is purpose and is it important to us? And what I found is indeed there are tons of studies that show that purpose is associated with health, happiness, and longevity, right? So this is a really important thing. Great scientific data out there on this. On the other hand, there's also data that show that 91% of people at some point in their life get something called purpose anxiety. This idea that purpose doesn't fill them up, it actually scares them and makes them feel bad. So what we have here is a paradox. How can purpose be both the most important thing and yet also be totally stressful? And so what I realized is that purpose is probably not just one thing, but at least two. And one of those things is probably associated with that health, happiness, and longevity. And the other is probably more associated with disappointment and anxiety. And so I called them little p purpose and big P purpose. Let's start with big P purpose. This is the one that I think actually upsets people. And the reason why is it's big, audacious, and goal-oriented. Think about being a millionaire or becoming president or traveling to the moon. These huge, big goals that people tell us we should have, right? We should be killing it and doing these big, audacious things. But the problem is, these goals are highly failable, and often we don't have agency to actually get there. So most of us, no matter how lucky we are, we might not have the genetics, we might not have been born at the right time, to the right people, or in the right place. You probably will not be a billionaire. It just is what it is. You want to be a Major League Baseball player? Maybe you weren't born with the right genetics. Maybe you didn't even have the right luck. It takes so many things to lock into place to do these big, audacious things. So if you set that up as your version of purpose and it's goal-oriented, the likelihood you're going to reach that goal is small. You're likely to fail and be disappointed. This is very scarcity mindset oriented, right? It's all or nothing, and usually it's winner takes all. So only one person's going to be president. Hopefully, only one person or very few are going to become astronauts. Everyone else is going to lose or fail. So I think if that's your version of purpose and you're not enjoying the process as opposed to the goal, you're going to find yourself upset. Now, let's contrast that to what I call little p purpose. Little p purpose, I think, is more associated with that health, happiness, and longevity. It's not goal-oriented, it's process-oriented. So what we're looking at is abundance. Like, what are things I could do which I would enjoy doing regardless of the outcome? There are millions of these kind of things. It's pretty hard to fail. All you have to do is go out there and try until you find some things you like. And as opposed to being all or nothing, it's kind of all or all. Like, everyone can succeed at this. We don't have to worry about if I succeed, someone else will fail. And so that's how I started looking at purpose. And I realized that looking at it more abundantly relieves all that stress and anxiety and allows us to really just focus on doing those things that we love doing.
It really resonated with me when you said that big P purpose is actually more of the scarcity mindset, which seems counterintuitive at first because in my mind, especially growing up, it's like, well, if I dream big, isn't that abundance? Like, I'm expecting that I can have these big things in my world. But I think what you're saying and my understanding of it is it's very narrow and it's very focused on the end goal. Do I become an astronaut? Do I get into the school of my dreams? In reality, when you can focus instead on the process, and I feel like I've even seen that in my life, when I'm enjoying what I'm doing, any success that comes from it is really fulfilling and amazing and obviously feels good, but it's fleeting. And really, it's like the day-to-day is actually so much more important and so much more fulfilling.
And that's, I think, a big point is it's not that I'm against goals. What I like to say is I'm goal agnostic, not goal phobic, right? So this idea is goals are fine and you can have goals and you can feel good when you reach goals. But if your whole version of purpose and happiness only comes with meeting that goal, then you're leaving a lot on the table. And I think as I found out with medicine, if you don't enjoy the process of getting there, yes, you feel some joy and happiness when you hit that goal, but it's fleeting and it's only a short period of time. So if 95 to 97% of your time you spend in process and only 2 or 3% of the time you actually achieve the goal, if the goal is the most important thing, you're kind of spending a lot of time doing things that you don't enjoy.
I completely agree with this. And I feel like being on sabbatical is a great time to like try out all these little P's. For example, I started salsa dancing because I'm like, I love dancing. I want to do salsa dancing. The only problem is in order to become a better salsa dancer, you have to go to salsa nights, which involves staying up late. And I actually like to wake up like super early, 4:30, 5 o'clock. And I realized salsa, it's not going to be it for me because it's going to involve all these late nights. On the other hand, another little P purpose I've been trying out is exercise. And I find that I'm just really loving exercise, but I don't want to be master at the CrossFit games or something like that. I just want to exercise every day and try out new things and maybe get a little bit stronger every day. So it's nice to not have to force a big, audacious goal when really that doesn't mean anything because if you're enjoying it, why do you even need this big, audacious goal?
And the goals are inflexible. It's exactly what you were saying. Like, if you like salsa or you like exercise and you let go of some of those goals, you find ways of integrating it into your life that fit you, that fulfill your needs. And the beautiful thing about Little P Purpose is it can fill you for 3 months or it can fill you for 30 years, and both are fine. Like, you don't need the pressure or stress that this is my one big purpose and it's going to fulfill me for the next 30 years. That's a huge amount of pressure to put on yourself. And we grow and evolve and change. And so our version of purpose should also be able to grow, evolve, and change. And that should be okay.
Another thing you mentioned with Little P purpose is that a lot of times pursuing your Little P purpose leads to building community. And then that building community also leads to more happiness. It's, I think what you said was it was one of the main factors in contributing to people's happiness. I found that myself, like with exercise classes, I see the same people over and over again, or some of our meetup groups that we go to. It's all people who are interested in the same thing that I'm interested in, and community forms from the little p purpose too.
Yeah, and I would tell you one secret from this book, and I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. It's not even, in my opinion, purpose that's so important. If you go and look at the most in-depth study about happiness, that's the Harvard Adult Developmental Health Study, started, I think, in the 1920s or 1930s, tracked originally a bunch of Harvard students and then 1,500 of their family members and then a bunch of people in the Boston area in general as controls. And they literally interviewed these people every 2 years. They did MRIs, EEGs, blood tests. They interviewed their family members and then studied them for 70 years. And all they were trying to figure out, or one of the main things, is what makes people happy. And the answer they came up with is it wasn't money. It wasn't prestige. It wasn't your job. And you know what? It wasn't even per se purpose. You know what it was? It was interpersonal connections. And so a lot of people are going to say, wait, Jordan, your whole book is about purpose and how important purpose is and why it leads to all these things. The truth of the matter is, I think if you pursue little p purpose, it is a conduit to community and connections. I think when you start doing things that light you up, you automatically attract people who are seeing you at your best, and like a moth to the flame, they come into your sphere. You end up collaborating with them. You become teacher and student, mentor, mentee. These are those interpersonal connections that they talk about in that Harvard adult study, which eventually lead to happiness. And not only personal happiness, because a lot of people listen to me and they're like, you're so selfish. All you want is to be happy. But what about changing the world? But the truth of the matter is, this is actually how I think it leads to impact. I'll go back to the story from the beginning of our conversation about Roman, the guy from the antique store. He pursued his little p purpose. It created community. That brought him happiness. But he also set a group of young kids out into the world with a new sense of confidence and belief in themselves. And those kids went out and changed the world. Some of them became doctors like me. I'm sure others became lawyers or CPAs. I'm sure some people bought and sold things like Roman did. The truth of the matter is, he changed the world. And you could say, well, he was selfish for just pursuing what he wanted to pursue. But in doing something that lit him up, like a stone dropped in the ocean, the water displaced continued. With nowhere else to go, it moved miles and decades and is still affecting people now. The guy I wrote that story about died a long time ago, but I'm still talking about him 30 years later. And that's kind of what I want for everyone reading my book, is to realize that the connection between little p purpose, community, happiness, and impact and legacy are just so durable that we can't afford to miss them.
It's so interesting because that really resonates with me coming from Indian culture as well, because it's so community oriented. And I think over my life, I've shifted my perspective on what is impact. Because when you're in these environments or around people who are very focused and giving to their community, our mom is somebody who's like that. Sure, she might not be affecting 1 million people, and she doesn't necessarily feel driven or excited by that idea, but she impacts so many people one-on-one. Like, there have been times where Sammie and I have both worked in a hospital with her, and people will stop us when they see that we have the same last name as her. They're like, your mom is such a great manager. I love working with her. She's so positive and bright. And I think that really showed me how much impact you can have on people just by focusing on your immediate community. And a lot of people she's like helped and mentored have like moved up in their careers. They've gone and helped and mentored other people. And it's really that ripple effect of helping one can help many, even though that was never necessarily the intention. And I wonder, part of that too, I think American culture can be a little bit more, smaller families. Maybe we don't think as much about the community impact. And so maybe we think, okay, to actually make an impact, I have to be like Elon Musk and I have to change the world. And like you said, that's almost setting yourself up for failure.
And Elon Musk is miserable. Look at the guy. He looks miserable. Elon Musk is a perfect example of someone who struggles with meaning and is trying to purpose himself to happiness. I mean, this guy has billions of dollars, more than anyone else, and has created some of the greatest tech and interesting companies out there. And yet the guy looks angry and is always arguing with people. he has a meaning issue. He can't purpose his way to enough. He has to go back and look at his childhood and the problems he had with his father and being teased on the playground. If he truly wants to find peace and happiness, that's where it lies. It lies with him in meaning and telling himself a better and different story about his childhood, not in all these accomplishments, because no matter how much you accomplish, it's never going to be enough if you don't have a good sense of meaning, if you don't tell yourself a better story about your past. The other thing I wanted to mention is when you're talking about your mom, it's this idea of act locally but think globally. Your mom's actions have definitely contributed to both of you becoming the people who you are. You've then created this podcast who lots and lots of people listen to, and somewhere out there, one of those people is changing their lives or doing something more intentionally. And so that ripple effect really does eventually reach thousands, maybe even millions one day. And so I think it's your best path to legacy and impact. Like, we worry that we're going to die and be gone and not live on. But in many ways, our actions, our pursuing of little p purpose, the things that light us up, I think end up being this lasting legacy and impact. People may not remember your name, but the things you do will affect people far in the future.
For me, one of my little p purposes has been spirituality, diving into Buddhism and some of these things that I've always loved. And this really reminds me of a story they have in the Buddhist text where the Buddha's best student, Subhuti, is asking the Buddha about if a person gains all the wealth in the world and gives it to charitable causes, they're actually still doing less good than the person who strives for inner peace for himself. And I think it's true. I think when we find that inner peace for ourselves, we just emanate this good energy that inspires everybody around us too.
Yeah, I think a lot about giving, especially money, because a lot of people say, oh, well, if I want to have a big impact, I need to make a lot of money so that I can do lots of philanthropy. But I always kind of thought, in a sense, when you give something like money, the contribution ends when the money runs out. But when you give of yourself, what I call generational growth as opposed to generational trauma, when we model this little p purpose behavior, when we show the people around us that we do things that light us up and then collaborate with them and affect their lives, that lasts, that continues, that's that ripple effect. And so I often think about, I love the fact that people give money. I think giving money is important, but I think when you give your natural gifts to the world by doing things you love to do, that impact can continue, I believe, longer.
So I know there's probably listeners out there who are like me when I was working and we're thinking about purpose or what we love or what we want to do, and we're just kind of clueless as to what we would even enjoy. Like, I think if you asked me like a year ago, I would feel like I had so little bandwidth to think about that. I don't even know where to start almost. So what do you recommend for people who are trying to discover their little p purpose?
So a lot of times, again, I go back to this idea that people think they're going to find their purpose. And I don't think you find your purpose. You really build or create it. But it is true that we have to have these inklings or these beckonings to build purpose around. And so what I call those is purpose anchors. So this idea that they're things that light us up and we can build a life of purpose around those. A lot of people have trouble figuring out what those purpose anchors are. And in the book, I talk about 4 or 5 really simple ways to do that. One of them I talked about a lot in my first book, Taking Stock, which is the life review. And the life review is something we do with hospice or dying patients. It's a series of structured questions where we ask them about their lives, what was important to them, what were their biggest successes, their failures, the important people in their lives, and most importantly, what will you regret now that you know you're dying soon? And so that series of questions, the life review, is actually a great thing for people to do who aren't dying. Because when we think about it, when you regret something you didn't accomplish when you're dying, it's kind of disappointment, right? Because you don't have agency to fix it because you're not strong enough, you don't have enough time or energy, etc. But when you take someone who's young and they have regret and you do have agency to change your life, regret then becomes just another way of saying purpose. So a life review is a great way of trying to look at what one of your purpose anchors could be. I tell people the simple one-liner is, if you found out you were dying tomorrow, what would you regret never having the energy, courage, or time to do? So I think that's a really good way to start with a life review. What do you regret? And could that become a purpose anchor? Another one, which also comes from my last book, is The Art of Subtraction. And I tell people, look at your work life. Let's say you don't enjoy your job. It doesn't feel purposeful. really start subtracting everything you don't like about your job and see if anything's left. So when I was a physician, I did this and I said, well, I don't like being on call. I don't like nights and weekends. I don't like owning my own practice. But you know what? There's one thing I loved that I looked forward to every week, which was my hospice meetings. And so when I subtracted everything out that I didn't like, I realized I love doing my hospice meetings. In fact, I'd probably do them even if someone wasn't paying me to do it. So using the art of subtraction was another way I could find a purpose anchor. I said, aha, hospice is important to me. I can build a life of purpose around that. So those are two ways, the life review, subtraction. Another way I tell people is look at the joys of childhood. This goes back to my baseball card example. What lit you up when you were a child before society told you that you have to be industrious and make money and do something professional? What were the posters you had in your bedroom? What were the awards, the medals that you had hanging up in your room? What were the pictures you drew? Basically, what lit you up as a kid, often those can be really nice anchors for what might light you up now. And last but not least, a really easy thing to do if you are not finding any purpose anchors anywhere in your life is the spaghetti method, which is throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and see what sticks. So say yes to things you normally don't say yes to. Hang out with people you normally don't hang out with. Do things that make you just a slight bit uncomfortable and see if you derive any joy from those. And if you do, double down and try doing a few more of things like that and see what happens. So I think those are some really good ways to start looking at your purpose anchors. But again, I want to remind people, identifying those anchors is the first step, but it's really incumbent upon you to then build a life of purpose around it. Remember, we're talking about purpose. Purpose is about present and future, and it is action-oriented. It's not passive, it's action-oriented. So you have to really build that life.
A helpful thing about the different strategies that you talk about here that I think you also mentioned earlier, which is that your purpose, your little p purpose, can be for 3 months. It can be for 10 years. It doesn't have to be for a lifetime. And I think combining that idea with your strategy is really helpful because I imagine people are probably like me, where sometimes you can have purpose perfectionism of, okay, let me find this one big thing that I can do that'll have an impact that's purposeful, that also lights me up. And what I like about your spaghetti method is get started. See what that inkling is. Is it, do you look at your life review and see that there's a big regret that maybe you could implement? Is there just little things you can even take out of your life that are not making you happy? Or are there things from your childhood? Did you love reading or collecting baseball cards or playing an instrument that maybe you want to dabble with a little bit and see if that gets you excited? And there doesn't have to be an end goal or a goal in mind. It's just, let me see how it goes and let me see how that makes me feel. Maybe I try something. Maybe for example, like we have a keyboard. We really thought we would start playing piano again, like when we were little. We don't do it that often, to be honest. And it's okay. Like, I don't think I miss it that much either. Sometimes it's fun to play around. Maybe we'll get back into it. But there are other things I've found, like writing or doing this podcasting, that just make me feel a little bit more alive. And those things can also end up leading to things that I just never anticipated. But getting started and trying out is so helpful.
And let me remind you, if you find yourself saying that I need to do that one big thing that looks like purpose, or if you start getting stuck on perfectionism, I would go back to the saying that you can't purpose your way to enough. Those ideals of perfectionism and that one big thing are probably much more rooted in meaning than they are in purpose. And you can't solve those meaning issues with purpose. If you're trying to purpose your way to enough, it's never going to be enough vis-a-vis Elon Musk, who has done all these amazing things, but it's still never enough for him. You really have to go back to meaning and say, okay, why do I have this perfectionism? What is the story I'm telling myself about myself from my childhood, from my trauma, from my generational trauma? Like, what types of things am I trying to deal with by achieving? But I've been doing that my whole life and it isn't working. And so that's going back again to meaning and working through some of that so you can relieve yourself of the necessity of having big goals, because you don't need goals to prove you're good enough anymore. You can just go forward with purpose in a joyful way in which you enjoy the process of doing what you're doing.
One of them that I really liked from your book is when you had people go through their job, like by tasks, and circle the parts that they enjoy. Because doing that, it really made me appreciate that, like, I do like preventative medicine, even though I don't necessarily want to be a practicing physician assistant. And I will find myself like listening to 7 hours of lipid content and no goal in mind, just I like learning about it, but that doesn't mean I have to see patients queue 15 minutes and create plans and do paperwork and all the things. I can just enjoy lipids.
Yeah, and here's the thing about it that I realized. If I had understood little p purpose better, I probably would have started in hospice at the beginning of my career, and I probably wouldn't have burned out. I probably would have had a lot more career longevity. I might not have got to financial independence as quickly because I wasn't making as much, but I wouldn't have needed to get to financial independence because I was kind of living based on my intentions and excitement and joy. And what you were just saying makes complete sense. Maybe being a PA really wasn't the thing for you, but maybe now you understand there are parts of health you really like and you can pursue those. Does that look like a master's in public health? Who knows? Does that mean becoming a researcher? The point is options are limitless, right? We're talking again abundance. Now you know that there's an anchor of something you like. That can become a job if that suits you, but it doesn't have to become a job. That can be something you do 40 hours a week, or it can be something you do as a hobby on the weekends. That can be something you do with other people or you do it alone. It can be something that makes you money, but it doesn't have to. The point is, if you do this and you enjoy the process of doing it, you've won already because you've taken time that wasn't purposeful and replaced it with time that is. And that's kind of winning the game. Like when we get to the end of our life, we want to have as much time filled with these purposeful activities because time passes no matter what we do and we have no control over it. You can control what you do as that time passes. And so our goal is to fill up that time with as much purposeful stuff as possible by listening to podcasts about lipids and studying them and doing that kind of stuff. That's exactly what you're doing.
You mentioned your journey to financial independence. Do you think that part of the reason people pursue financial independence is so that they can have an excuse to pursue their little p purpose?
I think people tell themselves that they don't have permission to pursue their little p purpose until they're financially independent, which I believe is a mistake. I think we can start doing it much earlier. And so in a sense, wealth and even financial independence becomes a mirage that keeps us from doing the deeper, harder work. Part of the point of my first book, Taking Stock, was we really should be putting purpose and identity and connections before we build our financial framework, and then we can build a reasonable financial framework around that. A lot of people like me did it backwards because we just didn't know better. All we knew was we need to make a lot of money, and when we make a lot of money, everything will be great. And then we make a lot of money and then have to do the hard work of realizing that the money is good and it's a great tool, but it doesn't necessarily solve our problems or make us feel more connected, give us more community, or even really tell us what our purpose is. That's the hard work we have to do. I'm hoping we can help people do that much earlier in the trajectory so they make some better decisions. Again, I'm a perfect example. If I had done some of that work and put purpose first before money, I would have realized that I loved hospice work and it would have changed my trajectory. I would have spent more time doing things that were deeply purposeful for me. Do I regret it? Well, I'm an optimist. So the story I tell myself about myself, the sense of meaning I attribute to that is that I needed to go through that process to be where I am today, which is very happy and living a very purpose-filled life. But could I have done things better if I had known better? Certainly. And that's the hope. And that's why I think we shouldn't put off little p purpose until we have enough money. Money is a great tool, and we can use that tool to help us pursue little p purpose. But even people with very little money have many, many other tools like our youth, our energy, our communities, our skills, our knowledge, our passions. Those are also wonderful tools. And just because you don't have money doesn't mean that you can't use those tools to start thinking about little p purpose now and eventually building the financial framework around your life that allows you to fit those things in now as opposed to putting it off for 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Dr. G, Michelle and I have really enjoyed your book, The Purpose Code, and we've really enjoyed talking to you today. I personally found your book just so insightful, a great tool for helping people find their purpose. And as someone on sabbatical, kind of exploring all these different things, I found it really validating, and it provided a lot of logic to what I'm experiencing and what's going on, like why I'm enjoying the things I enjoy and why maybe I didn't enjoy some of the other things that I did. What's a final piece of advice you have for anybody looking for their little p purpose?
My big advice is that you have to give yourself permission. Like, it's okay to just do the things you want to do. Look, society has sold us a bunch of goods about who we should be. And it's mostly because they want us to buy something, right? Influencers tell us we should have six-pack abs and we should travel the world and we should wear the nicest clothes. Advertisers tell us if we just buy this cologne or this car that our lives will be perfect and we'll be loved and everything will work. What they're doing is they're selling us a version of purpose that probably doesn't work for us. It's a big P purpose. It's audacious. It's something we might not have agency to have. Like, not all of us can travel the world. Not all of us look good in designer clothes. Not all of us can get six-pack abs. Not all of us are going to be universally loved because we have a nice car, which we can't afford. Society is selling this to us. And what we have to do is give ourselves permission to actually think about what we want. Not about what society wants. Not about what these people who are trying to make money off of us want. But we have to give ourselves permission to think about what we enjoy for no other reason than it lights us up. And that's good enough. It doesn't have to make you tons of money. It doesn't have to change the world, although I'm sure it will if you pursue it intentionally. It doesn't have to be Instagram or TikTok worthy. What fills you up? You have permission to do it. Why aren't you?
That is such a beautiful note to end on, Jordan. Thank you so much. Sammie and I, we really enjoyed the Purpose Code. It comes out January 7th. Go get a copy. We think you'll really enjoy it, especially if you're somebody who, if you feel like you could use a little bit of guidance around finding your little P purpose. You have a lot of really great exercises in the book that we both found really helpful. And to be honest, we're going to be making changes based off some of the things that we did. So thank you so much for writing the book. Where can people find you if they want to follow you? I'm sure they can get the book, The Purpose Code, on Amazon and such, but where's the best place to find you?
Best place to find me is at jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you can see where to buy both of my books, as well as learn what I'm doing and how I create content otherwise, which includes the Earn and Invest podcast. I have a financial blog, a medical blog, and the Purpose Code Substack, which talks about a lot of the ideas that are in the book.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jordan. We'll be linking to everything. And it was such a joy to have you on Build a Wealthy Spirit. We really, really appreciate your time and energy, and we're just happy to be able to spend this time with you. So thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you for having me for this wonderful conversation.